Kippur really, technically speaking, it's not a day of fasting. Yom Kippur is also a day of fasting. The fasting concept can be attached to a number of principles. On Yom Kippur, fasting is attached to the concept called inui, or affliction. It is a positive commandment that a Jew afflicts himself on the 10th of Tisha, Yom Kippur, to express to the Rebbeinu Shalom an aspect of suffering so that he can obtain a certain amount of forgiveness. The fasting that has to do with Tisha B'Av has nothing to do with affliction. The fasting and the other halachas, laws that have to do with Tisha B'Av, has to do with a concept called avelis. Now the word avelis means mourning. It means mourning, grief, sorrow, mourning. And specifically the halachas of Tisha B'Av attempt to embody the notion of mourning. Normally, my procedure is that when I talk about a specific moed rather, what I feel is very important is not to speak around the moed, around the day. It means I don't particularly care to speak about different details of the moed, the time, or different aspects of it. What I really want to do, and I feel is most successful, is to speak about the essence of the Chag, the essence of the moed. Once you grasp the essence, you will begin to understand why it looks the way it does. Now the truth of the matter is, Tisha B'Av is a very difficult essence to grasp. It is. Why? Because whether you realize it or not, Tisha B'Av is a reflection of some of the most fundamental principles of all creation. It is also a reflection of the application of those principles to the human, to the Minanushi, to man. It is a statement of what God did in the universe. It is a statement of how He created the world. It is a statement of why He made man. It is a statement of what man has become. And in that way, Tisha B'Av probably goes at the core of what we are today, perhaps more than almost any other moed. Hopefully, by the time you finish today, you will have a completely different understanding of Tisha B'Av. At least most of you. Some of you have been here before, some of you have heard some of this concept. To some of you, some of these ideas will be familiar. To most of you, they will not. But what I hope to achieve is at least that the group will have a different understanding of what Tisha B'Av really is all about. It is much more than fasting. It is much more even than what's been told. We know ostensibly that the historical basis for Tisha B'Av is what? What happens on Tisha B'Av? Well, basically, what we're told, and what is an established fact, is that on the 9th of Av, a most peculiar thing happens, and a most peculiar coincidence happens. The Beit HaMikdash was destroyed. Not once, but twice on the same day. In fact, it's an amazing thing. Chazal, the Talmudic scholars, Chachamenu, the sages, the ancient sages of Israel, knew that the first Beit HaMikdash was destroyed on the 9th of Av. They know that from the Torah. But the second Beit HaMikdash, which was rebuilt after the first one was destroyed, 7 years later, they don't really know what day it was destroyed. It's an interesting thing. Except that the statement in the Gemara is, what other day could have been destroyed on but the 9th of Av? That's an amazing, amazing statement, which they say. Why is that? Well, again, The essential historical fact that we know about Tisha B'Av is that the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed 2 times. The first and second Beit HaMikdash. We are all awaiting the third Beit HaMikdash, which will come with the coming of the Mashiach. And that Beit HaMikdash will never again be destroyed. But the first 2 were destroyed. There are a number of things that have occurred on the day of Tisha B'Av. A number of things. One of the major things that have occurred on Tisha B'Av was the spies. Was the entire situation with the spies or the Meraglim. And what was the situation with the spies? Right before the Jews approached Israel, after they had left Egypt, after they left Mitzrayim, they approached Israel and they sent forth a number of spies to spy out the land and to see specifically what the land of Israel was all about. The spies, when they were there, saw very great nations of the Goyim. They saw giants, and they became frightened. And they wondered, how is it possible for the Jews to conquer this land? And when they came back, they told the nation of Israel, they told the Jews, that Eretz Israel was populated by very powerful and great people, and that it will be enormously difficult to come to this land. That night, all the Jews spent weeping because they were frightened. They were frightened of going into the situation where they may lose their lives. So the Rebbeinu Shem said, what is this? How have you been taken out of Egypt? Have you been taken out of Egypt by natural means? If I successfully took you out of Egypt, do you think I lack the power to bring you into Eretz Israel? So the Rebbeinu Shem said, you weep now. You weep. Now you weep because you think your life is in danger. And as a punishment for this lack of faith in my ability, you will weep in the future on this very day. I will set aside this day in the 9th of Av, which was the day that they wept, for the time that when I bring punishment to the Jews, I will bring it on the day of Tisha B'Av. That's why the 9th of Av is a very unique day. It's a unique day because it's a day that Jews know that when the Rebbeinu Shem is angry, Tisha B'Av is the day he begins to exercise that anger. There are many things historically that happened on Tisha B'Av. We know that the Spanish exile in 1492 was on Tisha B'Av. World War I started on Tisha B'Av. There are many, many things which started on Tisha B'Av, and Jews know that this is the day which is muchal, or set aside for punishment. Not that we have to be punished, but if we have to be punished, Tisha B'Av is the day that receives that particular portion. This is what we know about Tisha B'Av. This is the start of what we know. So what do? We say, we lost the Beit HaMikdash. The Jews lost the first Beit HaMikdash and the second Beit HaMikdash. It was destroyed the first time by the Babylonians, by Nebuchadnezzar, and the second time it was destroyed by Titus under Vespasian. The first time it was destroyed in 586 BCE. The second time it was destroyed in 70 ACE. Why do we commemorate it for? Why? Why do we sit and mourn about something which happened 2,000 years ago? Or 2,500 years ago? Why should we mourn this? What does that have to do with us now? Well, the Jewish nation was once at its apex in those times. The Jewish monarchy existed, there was a king in Israel, there was a nation of Israel, we lived in, fine. Why do we have to mourn that now? What does that have to do with my life now? I go to work every day, I come home, I entertain myself, I'm busy fulfilling my needs and doing what I have to do. What does it mean to me that something was destroyed, a house made of wood and stone was destroyed 2,500 years ago or 2,000 years ago? And not only that, you want me to commemorate that? Okay, I'll commemorate that. Fine. But why do I have to fast? See, that's a long fast. It's the most difficult fast in the year. Why? Because it starts in the night at sunset and it ends sunset next day, 24 hours. Now what's the problem with that? The problem is that it happens in the summer, which is the most difficult time of the year to fast, and it's a very long day. So Tisha B'Av, in essence, is a more difficult fast than Yom Kippur. So why do I have to fast? Why do I have to fast about a fact, something which happened so long ago? That's a very valid question. And the truth of the matter is, unless you have an adequate answer to that question, really, it would be very difficult for you to fast. So, people fast because that's what it is. That's the accepted custom of the Klal Yisrael. So why should I have to fast really? We have a specific principle that has to do with all Mu'adim. It's a principle which is laid down by Rav Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, and it's a well-known principle. And what is that principle? That every Jewish holiday in the year, every one, does not commemorate anything. The concept of commemoration does not exist in Judaism. Sounds strange, doesn't it? It isn't strange. The Rebbeinu Shalom is a very logical being. Why should you commemorate something which has nothing to do with you, or which doesn't affect your life now? Why should you go through the pain of doing something, involving yourself in something, remembering something which is irrelevant? You want to remember something? Let's remember the Holocaust. 6 million Jews died. That's much more relevant to us than the fact that hundreds of thousands of Jews died 2,500 years ago. And what's the big deal? Jews have been dying throughout the ages. And what about all the pogroms? What about the Spanish Inquisition and the Khmelnytsky pogroms, where over 100,000 Jews died in the 17th century in the pogroms at that time, where all of Polish Jewry was wiped out at that time, at the Renaissance? Why don't we fast for that? What are we doing fasting for something that happened so many years ago that so really is not relevant to us? The answer is, we are not commemorating what happened 2,500 years ago. It's not a commemoration. It's not something necessarily that has to be remembered. If you want to remember things, there are things which are much more relevant for the memory. It has nothing to do with commemoration. It has nothing to do with remembering. It has to do with the fact that Tisha B'Av still lives. That's what it has to do. It has to do with the fact that every year that Tisha B'Av comes back, it is being repeated. That's the essence of the matter. Why is it being repeated? I don't see a Beit HaMikdash destroyed. On the contrary, we are now have the land of Israel. You want to visit Israel? Buy yourself a ticket on El Al and go. So why are we mourning for? Okay, you wanted to mourn before the state of Israel? What about now? Why should we mourn now? We have the state of Israel now. If you want to move there, you're perfectly free as a Jew to pick yourself up and move there. You can visit there. Why are we mourning the loss of the state of Israel? It's not a true exile anymore. So then why is Tisha B'Av applicable in these days? Because I say to you that Tisha B'Av is now. Tisha B'Av happens every year. Every year it happens exactly like it happened 2,500 years ago. Except that Tisha B'Av 2,500 years ago was visible, and now it is invisible, as far as you know. But it has its profound effects, and everything which occurred then is happening now. So the essence of the matter, if we want to understand what Tisha B'Av, we have to understand what happened 2,500 years ago. And also, why did it happen? It's not enough to understand what, it is critical to understand why. Because if we do not understand why, we will never be able to stop the cycle of it happening every year. The term that's used to describe what happened in the time that the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed is a term that I don't know if many people are familiar with. is called Shchinta Begalutza, or Shchina Begolus. What is the Shekhinah? The word Shekhinah comes from the word Shochan, which means to dwell or to inhabit. Essentially what the Shekhinah is the spirit of the Rebbeinu Shalom. It is the spirit, but not God Himself. It is His power which we have access to. It is the aspect of God which relates with the human being, with man, so that we can in some way come to know Him. That is what the Shekhinah is. It comes from the word to dwell, because it is the aspect of God which dwells among us. But it is only an aspect. It is His power in a sense. It is His presence in a sense, the way we can tolerate it and the way we can understand it. It is not the Rebbeinu Shalom Himself. What happens when you come into the presence of the Shekhinah? Isn't it true that God exists all over and everywhere? Yes. The Shekhinah exists all over the entire world. The Shekhinah, more than that, is a singular aspect of God which created the entire universe. Not only the universe, it is from the Shekhinah that everything comes from. But a very peculiar thing we're told, that on the Beit HaMikdash, on the temple, which existed in the time of Judea, 2,500 years ago, the Shekhinah hovered or dwells in that temple. So what does that mean, that it dwells in that temple? How does God dwell inside of a building? The Rebbeinu doesn't dwell in a building. That's absurd. The universe is a part of Him, not vice versa. But what happened was a very strange thing. What the Rebbeinu created was a window to the spiritual world. What are we as people? What are we as people? We are human beings, we are an Adam. We are the combination of a neshama and a guf. We are the combination of a soul put together into a body. Hence what arises is what's called a human being or the person. A combination of two things. Of a spiritual being, of a being called a neshama, which is composed of substance, ruchnius or spiritual substance, placed into a physical body. We are very unique because there is nothing else in all of creation which is similar or even parallel what human being is. Everything in creation is either purely spiritual or purely physical. A malach, an angel, is a purely spiritual being. An animal is a purely physical being. A human being is a combination of both. And that we are very different than anything else. Because of the fact that we exist in a body, we cannot feel what the neshama feels directly. The neshama, when it's not in a body, senses pure spirituality, since it is total spirit. It comes into access, it perceives, it apprehends pure spirit. When the neshama is in the body, such a thing is not possible, because the body, or the person, is confined to the five senses. Hence the neshama is trapped and imprisoned in the body, and no longer has access to the kind of information and the kind of awareness that it once had before. In the time of the first temple, in those days, there was an exception to this rule. Where was this exception? This exception was the Beit HaMikdash. You could go to Yerushalayim from wherever you lived, and as you approached the Har HaBayis, as you approached the Beit HaMikdash, you would suddenly be hit, and you would literally almost convulse into a mind-bending experience. What happened was, is that suddenly you can begin to apprehend the spiritual world. You can feel a presence which is not visible and not subject to five senses. But you can feel an enormous, enormous power which is present. Now, that's a very strange thing. How do you feel a power? How do you experience a power which is not there, which is not subject to physical sensation? You can't see it, you can't hear it, you can't touch it. But as soon as you come in, you feel an enormous power. But it's a strange power, because it's a power that you feel pervades all of reality. And it's the power of Kedusha. It is a power that when you feel it, suddenly brings incredible simcha or joy against your will. Probably the only thing which is commensurate with that is for those people who take drugs, for the moment that drug is applicable. On the most powerful drug that gives the greatest high in that small time, in a certain sense, it's commensurate, because it's a chemical high. This was not a chemical high. What this was a spiritual high that was attained simply by going to a certain place. Suddenly, you access the spiritual world, and the tremendous joy of that spiritual world came into your being merely by going to the Beit HaMikdash. That's what it means that the Shekhinah existed at that point. That's what we're saying. It is a window into heaven. If that's what the Beit HaMikdash represented, if it was a window into heaven, what happened when it was destroyed? The Babylonians and the Romans could never have destroyed the Beit HaMikdash while the Shekhinah was there. While the presence of God, not God, remember, just the power which He created, which represents Him. Let's be clear on this. The Shekhinah represents the power of God. It is not God. God does not hover or dwell anywhere. God is the essence of existence itself. But when that aspect of its power is located in a specific place, no human being can go in there and invade there. Do you think that Nebuchadnezzar could even walk into a Beit HaMikdash and suddenly bring his sword? Do you think that Titus is able to come into a Beit HaMikdash and rip it apart? When the high priest, when the Kohen Gadol, once a year used to go into the inner chamber, inside the building, once a year on Yom Kippur, in order to do certain types of specific activities. If he wasn't worthy, he would instantly die. Two lightning bolts would instantly come out of the Oren, which was there, and go right into his nostrils and consume the entire neshama. In an instant, if he wasn't on a spiritual level worthy of that kind of thing. Nadav and Avihu, the two sons of Aaron, died that way. They were killed as they entered into the Beit HaMikdash, into the Kodesh HaKadoshim. If that happens to any person, then how can a Goy, how can a Roman, how can a Babylonian go in and ruin it and destroy it? The answer is, he cannot. It is impossible for such an event to take place. In fact, one of the things they did in the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, was that they always tied a rope around him. Always. It was a rope tied around him, and a very long rope, because if he would die, they would be able to drag the body out, because nobody could go in to retrieve it. It would be impossible to retrieve the body, because anyone who came into the place would meet with instant death. So they have a rope on to schlep him out if the person wasn't appropriate. How did the Babylonians destroy the Beit HaMikdash? They destroyed the Beit HaMikdash because the Shekhinah left. There was no more Shekhinah. That's what happened. Once the Shekhinah, once the spiritual essence of the Beit HaMikdash left, once that window was shut, anybody can walk in and bust up the place. That was no big deal. If you had a hammer, if you had a crowbar, you can go in and do the job. That's all it took. Because there was no more than any apartment or any building. But in order for that to happen, the Shekhinah had to leave. What we mourn is not the destruction of the building. It is not even the exile. What we mourn is the loss of the Shekhinah. What we mourn is the loss of that window. That's what we mourn. We mourn an incredibly lost opportunity. An opportunity to come close to true spirituality while you exist in your body. While you are alive in human form. We've lost the opportunity to touch the heavens in a very direct fashion. But is this all we lost? No. We lost far more. Because the existence of the Shekhinah on the Beit HaMikdash was a reflection of the relationship of God to the world at that time. You don't know it. You don't realize it. You think that the world is as it is, and the world exists now the way it always has been, except that different peoples have come on the world, different families, different civilizations. Each one takes its turn and each one goes on. That's what you all think. You think that essentially life has been more or less the same as it was, except that we have more modern things today. Life is much more convenient, it's much easier. But essentially, what's the difference between us and primitive man? The difference between us and primitive man lies simply in the fact that life, the way we conduct our lives, is different. We have more opportunities, we have a much greater control of nature. And those people way back then were essentially like us. Their consciousness was the same, their concerns were the same, their family life was basically the same. What changed was the culture, was the environment, the outer experience radically changed from generation to generation. We think that God created the world, right? And that therefore He exists in a certain relationship to that world. What I mean relationship to that world, meaning the following. That the Bereshit created the world, physical world, and He created the aspect which represents Him in that world, the Shekhinah. And we think that the Shekhinah and the world relate in a certain given distance. In other words, now that we've been created as people, we have bodies, and we're concerned with physical events, we think that a certain distance has been set up between us and the Shekhinah, us and pure spirituality, and that distance can never be transcended. That distance between the Shekhinah and man is a constant aspect. That's what we think. But this is an incredible mistake. It is not only an incredible mistake, but the true mourning of Tisha B'Av is that you're not even aware of what the situation really is. The true availance of Tisha B'Av is that you don't even know what you've lost. We are so far away from what once was. We have descended to such a small level that the awareness of that descent is gone. So you think that Tisha B'Av is only the fact that you can't eat that day. If you knew what you really lost, you would give up eating for a year if you really understood what you lost. What did you lose? You think you lost the window? No. We did. That's a big tragedy. But is that it? No. Far more than that. You lost far more than that. What you lost was the nearness to God. God moved. He moved. He went further away. That distance between the Shekhinah and man, which you think is constant, which you think is governed by reality, by substance, by physical versus spiritual reality, is an incredible variable. How close God is to the world varies. It makes a very big difference. Now you may say to yourself, well, what does that mean? God is close or God is far. If I can't see Him, if I can't relate to Him spiritually, what does that mean to me that He moves or that He stays? Or He's close or He's far? I don't know what that's talking about. Therein lies the entire essence of Tisha B'Av, and probably the most important thing that you should know about what it means to be alive. When God is near, what does that mean? That means that His presence is felt. His power is felt. It means that the light which is the metaphor for that power, is seen. When God is distant, that means that light is hidden and the power is concealed. What does that mean to me? That means that you become less human. That's what it means. The loss of God, the loss of that nearness, is the loss of humanity. It's not the loss of God as such. It's the loss of who you were as people. That's the loss. And that's really what Tisha B'Av is all about. What am I talking about, the loss of humanity? I'm here. I'm a person. I have a body. I have consciousness. I have awareness. What did I lose? What did I lose? What you lost is consciousness itself. Whereas once you had a very wide consciousness, now you have a very narrow consciousness. Whereas once you had access to incredible information, whereas once you had access to tremendous experience of deep simcha, we no longer have access to that at all. The example which is given, which I think is an appropriate one, let us imagine, for example, that suddenly the vision of men was confined to the color blue. Let us say that man, the nuke man, suddenly can only see blue and no other color. That's all. The brain can only interpret the electrical signals, the electrochemical signals of blue. And that's all you saw. I ask you, what is the difference in your world if everything looks blue or everything looks the way it does? Is that a diminution of your simcha? Does that make a difference to your experience? I don't think so. The world wasn't in 7 colors, and now it's in 1 color. Would your life be the same? I would see where your mark difference. What happens if your ability to hear suddenly was reduced to 1/10 of what it is now? Would that change your life? I think so. You might as well throw out all your music tapes. Music will become a very boring enterprise. What happens if your sense of taste was confined simply to the taste of sour, and that was it? That's all. If you put sugar on your tongue, there would be no response. Would it make a difference in your life? It would make a vast difference in life. It would make a vast difference to a lot of people who make their money selling this kind of stuff. You'd probably be much healthier, but in any case, it would make a vast difference in your life, wouldn't it? What am I talking about? I'm talking about your perceptions. I'm talking about your sense perceptions. If I would minimize your sense perceptions physically, if I would make every one of your sense perceptions 1/10 of what it is now, you would be miserable. Let's say you remembered what you were once before. Let's say I took you as you are now, and I suddenly made you into 1/10 the awareness that you had. Would you want to get up in the morning? Would you make a fast day for that? You wouldn't eat probably the rest of your life because you were so miserable. Why do we observe Tisha B'Av? Because that's exactly what happened. What I have just told you in physical form is what happened to man. He was reduced to 1/10 of what he was after the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed. After the first one was destroyed. After the second was destroyed, it took another 10th. And down the line, each year there was another fraction reduced. Until right now, we are probably 1/10,000th of what the person was at the time when the Beit HaMikdash was here. The loss of that Shekhinah, the distancing of that Shekhinah, is the loss of humanity. It's the loss of awareness. It's the loss of the capacity to experience. That's what it really means. when God hid, when the Banishim says on that day when you commit those sins, and on the days you do what you do, I will hide my face. That's what the Banishim says. What does it mean, I will hide my face? It means you will no longer receive the bounty. You won't receive the power in which I possess. If you don't receive my power, you will not be what you are. You will be different. If before you were a man, you will now be a mule. If before you were a malach, you will now be a man. And that's what the Gemara says. The Gemara says, if the people, who's saying this? The Gemara is saying this. We're talking about Rabbi Akiva. We're talking about men who are giants in spirituality, who we are considered dwarfs. And they said that if those people who lived in times of Beis Hamikdash were like malachim, if we can consider them like angels in their grasp of truth, in their grasp of spiritual essences, then we are like regular men. And if they were regular men, we are like donkeys. And I say to you, if they were donkeys, we are insects. Because that's exactly what it is. In comparison to what of man, what man? You're a regular person. You're John Doe who lived in 650 BCE. Every one of us in this room is an insect compared to that person, Chaim Yankel. Or Esther Miriam, who lived at that time. If you understood what Tisha B'Av was really about, you would really be depressed. Really depressed. Do I want to make you people depressed? Yeah. Not because I'm a sadist. It's because if you realize what happened, and you realize who you are, and you really become depressed, you will do something about it. Maybe next year there won't be a Tisha B'Av. You know what it means that next year won't be a Tisha B'Av? The Gemara says, every year in which the Beis Hamikdash is not rebuilt, it is as if that generation destroyed it. You hear that? The Beis Hamikdash is not something with the Shekhinah leaving that's done once, and next year it has to go on. Why does it have to go on? Why can't Baal Shem tell Klal Yisrael, the Jews, build it again, and the Shekhinah again will dwell in it? Why can't we do that? We can't do that because we're not worthy of it. And if we're not worthy of it, it means that if it was existing now, it would again be destroyed. That's what it means. The Beis Hamikdash exists in two modes. Either it exists or it doesn't exist. And that mode depends on who we are and what we are. If we are worthy of it, if it's appropriate, then the Beis Hamikdash will exist. If we are not worthy, it won't exist. Which means that just because the Jews lost it once, that doesn't mean that the next year it didn't have to be there. They can build it again, and the Shekhinah can again return. The Baruch Hashem again can project forth His power and His light. He can do that. What's the big deal? The big deal is that nobody ever got themselves together. No one ever got their act together. They got their act together one more time, so it was rebuilt. But even then it wasn't like it was before. The second Beis Hamikdash was totally different than the first Beis Hamikdash. Completely different. All the miracles which were witnessed in the first one didn't exist in the second one. After the second Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, it was never again rebuilt. Why wasn't it rebuilt? Not because it wasn't rebuilt, because the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed year after year. Tisha B'Av means not a commemoration. We don't remember what happened 2,500 years ago. Tisha B'Av is a repetition. It is a repetition of a destructive process that goes on year after year. Every year that Beis Hamikdash is not built, it is destroyed. Why? Because if it was built and we were the generation that would receive it, it would be instantly destroyed. The Baruch Hashem would send another horde to destroy it. This time probably the Russians. They would come and destroy it. The Shekhinah would leave, and suddenly the Russians would come in and blast it away. That's exactly what happened. If that Beit HaMikdash was reconstructed now, if not the Russians, then the Arabs. And to tell us the fact that we don't deserve a Beit HaMikdash, who sits on the Beit HaMikdash? Who sits on it? Who sits on the Mokum, on the place where the Shekhinah dwelt, where the Aron was, where that place was? Do the Jews sit there? No. The Arabs sit there. Do you think it's a coincidence that the Arabs don't sit there? What, you think because the Jews, what do you think? You think because the Israeli government doesn't want to make war with the Arabs, and doesn't want to incite a war, they don't throw them out and say, get out of here, this is our Mokum? We threw them out of Israel. Why don't we throw them out of the most holiest place in Israel? Why not? Because we don't have the power to do it. Because God doesn't let us do it. Because God would rather have Arabs on it than Jews. That is the essence of the matter. And I will repeat it. It may sound insulting, but I want you to realize what's involved. The Baruch would not have an Arab sitting on the Mokum HaMikdash with his temple, praying to his Muhammad, that have a Jew sit there with his Beit HaKnesset, being korbanos or whatever have you. That's what it is. How do I know this? Where do I get this information? Very simply. Because if the Baruch didn't want an Arab there, an Arab wouldn't be there. If the Baruch wanted a Jew there, the Jew would be there. There would be a shul. There would be mizbeach. That's what it is. Nobody gets anywhere without the will of God. You can't lift your hand unless He agrees. Without the consent of Baruch, you can't. The Gemara says you cannot lift your finger from one part to the other unless they allow the thing to happen. That's it. A person is walking along the street, suddenly has a stroke. That's it. That's the end of his motion. You see, God took away his motion because that was the gzera, that was the decree. Why does the British want Arabs and not Jews? Why? What kind of sense does that make? What did we do that's so bad? What? What do we do that's so bad? That's so destructive that the Baruch refuses to allow the Jews to be on the Mokum HaMikdash, and with us, and with all these other people he does. Essentially the way we act to each other, and it's essentially based on what a mitzvah really is. What exactly is a mitzvah and what is an avera? What is a doing the will of God and what does it mean to transgress the will of God? What does that really mean? What are we really giving up in the process? We know a specific fact that the Baruch says, if you do my mitzvahs, if you observe my commandments, if you draw yourself close to who I am and to what I am, I will give you everlasting life. Now, I don't know what that means to most of you people, but I'll tell you what that means. That means that you will be in a position someday where you no longer will die. You will not know the word death. You will be in a place or in a condition where you will perceive and become aware of absolute beauty and perfection, and you will experience complete simcha without a grain of pain, without a grain of stress. And how long will this take place? For all time. Now that sounds like something out of Disneyland, doesn't it? Or it should be one of the places in Disneyland called Utopia. But the truth is, that's called Olam Haba, the world to come. And the Baruch says that if you cling to me, if you do my will, if you understand my will, if you do that which is required, then I will change your condition. Forget about the fact that I have diminished your awareness from generation to generation. The Buddhism says, you think that the awareness of those people who existed a long time ago was good? That's nothing to what your awareness will be like when I will change the condition of the world on a permanent basis. The Buddhism says there will come a time that I will eradicate what we know as the human condition. I will change and transform what you know as the human mind, so that you will burst from your five senses and you will become cognizant and knowledgeable about things which are far beyond anything that he has ever made. The Buddhism knows and says that I have created conditions which is something like you have never experienced. Gemara says, what is this condition? It's called Olam Haba. And the Gemara says, basically, has anyone ever seen this place? But the Pasuk says, Ayin lo yira'asa. No eye has ever seen that future world. What eye? Not the eye of a person, not the eye of a malach, not the eye of the highest of the malachim, the most spiritual of spiritual beings, the highest of neshamas. No one has ever even begun to experience what that world is like. It is beyond our capacity to understand it. There was a very great man. His name was Yitzchak Luria, the Ari. He was the greatest Kabbalist in 2,000 years. He was a giant of a spirit. And in the Kabbalah, in the learning that he brought down, he said that there are certain things in which we can study and we can know, and there are certain types of information that we cannot know and not study. And after that we cannot. Who was this man, the Ari? I want to give you a glimpse. I'll give you a glimpse of what it was like, what the people were like in the Beit HaMikdash. He lived in the 16th century. He died, I think, in 1570 something. He died at 38 years old. He was a very young man. He died at 38. But Moshe Chaim Lutzaro died at 40. He died at 38. In fact, his yurtzeit was yesterday of the Ari. What kind of man was he? What kind of Jew was this? He personified what the Jew was of old. In the time of the Beit HaMikdash, in the time of the prophets. What was he? He could look at you, and just by looking at your entire body and your face, he can tell you all the lives that you lived before. He can come next to you and smell the odor of your body, and he can instantly tell you what Avera you just did. He can look at you, and he can understand where you were created from, and where you fit in the ultimate purpose of creation itself. He can look at you and he can read, literally, all the sins you did that day and what you did before. He can look at you and he could know what you're about to think 5 minutes in advance. This is what his student writes, Rav Chaim Vital. He writes that this man was a living malach. He says, when I'm about to write about my Rebbe, Rav Yitzchak Luria, I didn't hear the story. It wasn't some story that was told to me. It wasn't a tale that was told. I didn't read in a book. I saw this. And what I see is absolutely unbelievable who this man is. It's like a walking angel. In fact, his name is Rav Yitzchak Luria, and he spells the Ari. Aleph Resh Yud. What we usually think is Rav Yitzchak Luria is the Ashkenazi, because his parents were, he ultimately came from Ashkenazim. But the word Aleph here stands for Eloki. His name was the godly Rabbeinu Yitzchak. Nobody calls that. No man has a preface to his name called Eloki. You will never see that. Eloki. Eloki means godly, a man of God. Because there was not such a person that ever lived. At least not one that we saw. This man was a throwback to what existed a long time before. What Rav Chaim Vital writes is he knew everything that was going on in the heavens. Whenever there was a decree against the Jews, he was instantly aware of it. He knew the decrees of each person. He knew what would happen to a person. He knew all these things as a matter of course. There was no magical formulas. He simply knew this by the virtue of what his insight was. Where did he get this insight? Where did he get all this information was? Because Ya'ari was very closely connected to his neshama. And his neshama, his soul, was an enormous light. And he simply knew what his neshama was there. He felt it. He had Ruach HaKodesh. He felt and knew all these things automatically. You think that's spectacular? That's not necessarily spectacular. In the time of the Beit HaMikdash, there were 1 million people that were able to do that. Every other Jew down the block was able to do the exact same thing when that Beit HaMikdash and that Shechina was there. That's right. They were able to do the exact same thing. You would have been able to do that had you lived at that time. Now I ask you, did you lose something? That's what the Jews were like at that time. That was the level of their capacity. There were so many prophets in Israel. Prophets. What is a prophet? A prophet is an individual who's able to come into contact with his neshama and suddenly come into contact with information about the future or information about reality, about the way God connects the world that's completely unknown and unknowable. And this wasn't your once-in-a-while Jew. This wasn't a Jew that you had to go look from one end of the earth to the other. Hey, is there a man who has Ruach HaKodesh? Maybe this one will give me a bracha. Is there anyone left? You know? You got to search the entire planet to find maybe one or two of them. We still had Jews like that. Not long ago, we had a man, a tzaddik, Rabbi Yisrael Avuchatzera. Or they called him Baba Sali, who had such a gift, not the same as the Ari, not the same like that, but he had an enormous gift. If he would serve, for example, food that was cooked on Shabbos by accident, where he would not know it, he would simply put it aside and say, this food was cooked on Shabbos. I don't want to eat it. I don't want to eat it. If he would say to a person who was sick and had a very serious illness, he would say, I don't want to see you with that illness. If the person had advanced cancer, the next morning it would be gone. He had that power. And he only lived, he died 2 years ago. There were hundreds of cases of people who testified to this. There's a whole book written on this, called Baba Sali, available in English, if you want to read what this man is about. There's a man who lives now, the Ribnitz Levi, who one day when they woke him up, one day he doesn't have a clear sense all the time of what days of the time. Once they woke, in the morning he got up on Shiva B'Tammuz. Shiva B'Tammuz was the 7th day of Tammuz, which is a fast day. This happened several years ago, 2 or 3 years ago. It happened 3 years ago. And he wasn't clear what day of the week it was. He realized it was but he didn't realize it was the 7th day of Tammuz. No one told him in that sense. He's a very old man. So they came to bring food, and he said, no eating today. Today's a fast day. How do you know that? No one told him that it was a fast day. And he hadn't seen the calendar in a long time. There's no way that he could have known. But he knew because he was instinctively able to feel. Because what he felt was a light. He felt what the essence of a day is. Because the essence of a day is a certain spirit which invades that day. You don't understand that Tisha B'Av is not just a day of the week. It's not the 9th of Av. If our souls were sensitive, we can sense the spiritual light that comes down on Tisha B'Av. And you would know that it is Tisha B'Av, even if you never saw a calendar for the entire year. But these men are few and far between. And the truth of the matter is we almost have none of them left. They are almost all gone. But at the time of the Beit HaMikdash, we had millions of them. Millions of them. Who all had that capacity. Rabbi Yitzchak Luria, who lived 400 years ago, he said that all the knowledge which I will give you, that I have learned from Elijah, Eliyahu Navi, who he saw every day. He used to learn with Elijah the prophet, who of course never died, and who is in different forms, in different ways, constantly coming back to the world. He used to learn with him every day. He was as friendly with Eliyahu. He was as friendly with a malach. He was as perceptive as a malach as you see me here. That's how well he can see all these beings. He said of the chokhmah, of the wisdom which I want to give you, there's a line. There's a certain information that I can instruct you, and there's certain information that I will not give you. It cannot be understood or known, he said. That's what he said. This is the line. Beyond that line, no mind can go. Not my mind, not the mind of Moshe Rabbeinu, not the mind of Adam Rishon. No mind can transcend beyond this line. Because no mind can understand what's beyond that line. What is that line? That line is the description of what Olam Haba will look like. The world in which all of us will one day be in, as a result of our mitzvahs and a result of our deeds, is not simply a world which is invisible. It's not simply a world which cannot be located. It is a world whose condition is so superior to anything we can even see that it's unimaginable. It is unimaginable. That is the level of Olam Haba. That is the level of which all of you can attain by the performance of mitzvahs, by doing, by coming close to the Rebbeinu Shalom. The question that we ask, which is a fundamental question, is that Olam Haba will exist. How long? How long is this incredible condition going to last? Forever, without change. This world lasts only a certain period of time. A person lives 70, 80, 90 years, and it's over. That time, that condition will last to the end of time, meaning without end. The question that we raise is, how is that possible? How can I do something for 70 years, for 40 years, whatever it is, to earn what I'm going to get without time? That doesn't make sense. If the essence of this world is a world where I have to earn what I must get later on, if the essence of Olam Haba, this world, is to acquire the state, that condition which will exist without time, how is that possible? I can do mitzvahs all day long. So the Rebbeinu Shalom says, okay, I'll give you 1,000 years of Olam Haba because I have a good heart. So the Rebbeinu Shalom says, I got a bad heart. I'll give you 10,000 years of great conditions because of what you did for 30, 40 years, 50 years. Do we say that the Rebbeinu Shalom has a great heart? Yes. But the Rebbeinu Shalom doesn't say that. So I would be satisfied if the Rebbeinu Shalom said to me, look, I'll tell you what, you're going to give me 100 million years of this incredible satisfaction and joy for what I'm doing for 50 years? Would any of you turn down such a deal? No. Imagine 100 million to 50. But the Rebbeinu Shalom doesn't say I'll give you 100 million years for your 50 years. For your 50 years of work, I'm not going to give you 100 million years. I'm going to give you infinity. No end. Look, I'm a sensible guy. I sit down and I understand a hard day's work, $1 for a hard day's work. I can understand that. But how can I be paid an infinite amount of time, an infinite amount of reward for 50 years' work? I mean, that's ridiculous. Somebody's getting conned, and it's not me. What must we say about that? What we see from that is the essence of a mitzvah. Because how can one mitzvah earn that? Do you know that if Adam Rishon had done his only one mitzvah that he was given, he would have earned eternity from one mitzvah? How is that possible? Because you must understand the power of a mitzvah. What is the power of a mitzvah? The power of a mitzvah is really eternal. Because what it is you are not guaranteed from 1 minute to the next that you will live. Nobody has any kind of guarantee that 5 minutes out of this door he will be alive. You don't have a guarantee on the next second. whatsoever. Which means that human life exists now. Every second which I am is my life. When I'm involved in a specific activity, and I don't know whether I should do something or not. If, for example, I want to do something which is very pleasurable, it's very pleasurable, but I know that it's not allowed. I know that the Torah says don't do it. I have to sit and think. I have to say to myself, wait a minute, should I do it or not? Well, what does it depend on? The Buddhism says don't do it or not. What does it depend on? If I give this thing up, if I give this thing pleasure, if I give this pleasure up, in essence, what am I giving up? I'm giving up that pleasure now. But the truth of the matter is I'm not giving it up now, I'm giving up eternity. Because I don't know if I'll be alive 5 minutes from now. My existence exists now. Existence, the sum total existence is now. Not 5 minutes from now, or 20 minutes from now. Because I don't know if I'll be here. If I give up that pleasure, if I do the will of God, essentially what I'm saying is I am giving you my existence. I am giving you the sum total of my existence. Because I don't know what's going to be in a couple of minutes from now. Therefore, if I keep your will, I keep your will because I am giving you the gift of what I am now. So what does the Buddhism say? You give me your existence, then I will give you existence. And what is the essence of existence? Eternity. Because existence by definition is without end. So the Buddhism simply repays you what you gave him. It's not a question I do one mitzvah, I get 2 years. I do one mitzvah, I get 5 years. That's not what it is. I do one mitzvah now, and I get eternity. Because I've given the Buddhism eternity. Because my 1 second now is my eternity. That's eternity for me. And the mysterious nefesh that you give to the Buddhism is eternal. So the Buddhism says, that's what I give you. I give you eternity. But wait, if that's the power of a mitzvah, what's the power of an avera? What's the power of a transgression? The power of a transgression is that you destroy eternity. Because that same situation which you could have done a mitzvah, you now destroy the opportunity. So therefore, that which the Buddhism has given us is not a question of do this and do that, or don't do that, for this minute or next week or a year from now. What the Buddhism said is, I want you to commit your life, your existence to me, for as long as you exist. You see. And at every second, that is the gift in what you're giving. Every time you decide not to do His will, you decide to do your own, essentially you are saying existence is mine, and I control existence. In other words, it's my existence what I want. So the Buddhism says, you want your existence? Then I'll give you your existence. What your existence was, it's only 1 second. That's it. That's all you'll have. So what you get in return? Nothing. Non-existence. That's why essentially the reward of a mitzvah is eternity, and the punishment of a chait is non-existence. Because that's exactly what's on the next bargaining table. That's the wager. Suddenly become pompous and we become arrogant and we say we want to define existence the way we are in terms of what we are. If that's what we do, then the Buddhism says I will diminish your existence. If you want to abuse or you want to neglect my will, if you want to throw away eternal life, then what I will be forced to do, what I will do is diminish who you are. I will make you less human, you see, so that the damage you do is less. I will not let you be a being who knows what the future is or what the past is in any sense, or can understand these things. I will not allow you to be a nation who is in such contact with spirituality. I will not allow that. Because if I will allow that, then the power that I have given you, the power of a mitzvah or chait, the power of what? Of a mitzvah or a transgression, that power is so enormous, you are not worthy of that power. I will not allow your hand to touch a generator that controls 100 billion volts. I will not give you that ability because you're not worthy of it. So instead I'll give you a generator that now controls 50 million volts. And if you keep on abusing what I've given you, if you keep on ignoring what I say, if you do not take advantage, if you reject the opportunity that I give you, I will lessen your ability to do the damage. I will lessen your ability to acquire. So fundamentally, what we have lost in the process is our humanity. What we should have been. What we have lost is the opportunity. We haven't lost it totally, but the opportunity diminishes. Because the less consciousness we have, the less awareness we have, that means that the mitzvah and the chait are less. Because it means we can acquire less. The Bereshit wanted to save us. So he puts us in a situation where we don't have to lose so much. But if we're in a situation where we don't have to lose so much, we are in the same situation where we cannot gain so much. So it's our loss. Every time we do a chait, every time we do a mitzvah, we are controlling the ratio of the amount of spirituality we obtain. The more chatoim we do, then the smaller we become as humans, as people. The less contact we have with spiritual reality. The further God moves himself away, so to speak, in terms of withdrawing his power, or the aspect of his power from us. And we become less. And when we become less, we are able to do less. And since we're able to do less, we get less. That is the greatest punishment, in a sense, that can be given to you, isn't it? If I put you in a lottery, for example, and that lottery now is a, let's say that lottery, for example, is a 1 out of 5 chance of winning, which is not bad. Or let's say better, if I put you in a lottery where there's a 1 out of 2 chance of winning, let me say this. 1 out of 2. And I make that purse $100 million. That is an incredible thing. But if I say, if you dilly-dally in terms of what? In terms of entering that lottery, I say, look, you don't respect what I'm giving you over here, do you? So, I'll change the purse. $1,000. What the punishment says is, I don't want the abuse. You don't realize what I've given you. This is the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. The destruction of the Beis HaMikdash is a loss of the Shekhinah. It's the loss of the power of God as it exists in our midst. More fundamentally is the loss of who we are. And even more fundamentally is the loss of what we could have been. That is the ultimate loss. What you could have been. But nobody mourns that, because nobody knows what we could have been. We think that whatever we could have been is what we are right now. So then why mourn, why fast? That's why I tell you, you could have been an Ari. You could have been that. You were that. At a different time in your existence, you were that. And now, you are what you are. If that's not a cause for depression, I don't know what else is. Tisha B'Av is going on now. This is it. We remain in this state because the Baruch refuses to elevate us. He refuses to elevate us because we refuse to understand the opportunity in which He has given us. That's why He refuses to elevate us. Because we are not elevated, we are nowhere near what we really could be. It is our loss, not His. Every year that we celebrate Tisha B'Av, every year we diminish. Guaranteed. For as long as we go on. Every year that there's a Tisha B'Av, when that day approaches, you know we have failed. We blew it for that year. That is guaranteed. Because if we would be where we should be, if we would respect the opportunity that we had, you wouldn't see a Tisha B'Av again. Why? Because you'd have a Beit HaMikdash. You wouldn't have a bunch of Arabs sitting around. You wouldn't have that. I had a recent experience. I was in Israel just a couple of months ago. And it's an interesting thing. The point was brought home so powerfully. I went to the Kotel Saturday night, Moshe Shabbos, and I was there at 3 o'clock in the morning. there are not many people there at 3 o'clock in the morning. Okay? Very few people there. And what it was is, I was at the coastal there, and I davened a little bit, and I left the coastal at 3, and I don't know if you're familiar with the thing, but I left it and I went into the old city. And what you do is you have to walk up certain steps into the old Jewish old city. And what it is from that step you turn around, and when you look at the coastal is in the distance, but it's a unique vantage point because from there you can see the 2 mosques. The Mosque of Omar, it goes into, you can see the mosque. And they're very large mosques, and they stand out, and you have this small coastal there. The last remnant of the Beit HaMikdash. The one zeicha that the Baruch Shem left us to what we once had. And I was watching it, and a very strange thing happened. Suddenly, I hear this incredible sound blast out from the loudspeakers. What was it? It was a Muslim call to prayer. And it was a prayer that lasted for a half hour. That's how long it lasted. So I turned to the guard and I said, what is this? What is it doing in the middle of the night? The sound was probably like, you can hear it probably all over the old city. What it was. So he said, well, that's what it's 5 times a day. Even every 5 times a day, you hear that this is going from Saudi Arabia, from the Mecca, whatever it's on, and it's what it is, and it's blasted throughout the entire thing. And it was a voice that went from one end of Yerushalayim to the other. And it was an amazing thing. What I saw there, what I felt, here I'm looking at the Kotel, this battered, beaten up wall, this last remembrance of what we were once were, and on top of it, dominating are these 2 huge mosques. And filling the entire heaven was the prayer of the Muslims. It's like it was saying, in a sense, the Baruch was saying, or rather, the Sultan was saying, the accuser of the Jews was saying, I have it, mine, not yours. This does not belong to you Jews. No. All you have is that broken wall there. That's what you have. I have the place, and I have the voice. It is mine. It belongs in the Goyim. It is ours, and it is not yours. Well, it's a confirmation. That's what it is. Interesting timing, isn't it? But that's what it is. You can see and you can feel the dominion, the foreign domination on our land. Why? Because what exists is a domination over a piece of land. That's all it really is. Basically. It is a domination over a piece of land, is a domination of a place. And what the Baruch Shem says, that's what I say to you. They have this, they have what should be yours. Because you refuse to be what you should be. If you refuse to be what it means to be a Jew, if you refuse to understand what Torah is, if you refuse to take in the account of what the opportunities are, then I will refuse to be what I should be to you, at least on a visible sense. And you will no longer see me in the way that you saw me in years ago. You will see a broken wall. That's all you will see. That's all you will have. Why? Because that's what you are. That's what you are. You are a broken wall. The wall is a reflection of you. That's all it is. It is an exact reflection. You are all broken walls. We are all broken walls. The Jewish nation is a broken down wall. That's what it is. That's why that's all we have. If we were more than that, we wouldn't have a wall. We'd have a Beit HaMikdash. We'd have a Shina there. We'd have a window to heaven. We have what we look like. The Beit HaMikdash is a mirror that reflects what we are. If we are celebrating Tisha B'Av in a couple of days, it's because we are still broken walls. Bricks put together in a minimal way. That's why Tisha B'Av is about to come. Because we are still there. This is the essence of the Chag. or the essence of the noise. This is what it is. Think about this. Think about a world where there is no Tisha B'Av. Because in a world where there is no Tisha B'Av, it's not the world that looks like out there. It's a different planet. That's the concept. A world without Tisha B'Av is simply not a world where there's a Beit HaMikdash and there are Jews going there to pray or to sacrifice or whatever have you. That's not a world without Tisha B'Av. A world without Tisha B'Av is a world where there are men who can understand what goes on in the heavens. That's a world without Tisha B'Av. And that's what you don't have. That's the Lord, and that's the mourning. And that is the cause for enormous, enormous depression. But from that depression is a salvation. Because you can undo the damage. How? Begin to take responsibility for what those mitzvahs are. Understand that a mitzvah and a chayk is not a question of a single deed. It's a question of eternity. That's the question. Every time you do what you should do, you acquire a piece of eternity. And when you do what you should not do, or you don't do what you should do, you lose that eternity. And what happens is that wall goes down. And I want you to know that if you think that now we are a wall, it could get worse. If we don't elevate ourselves, we someday will not even be a wall. We'll simply be 2 levels of stone. Because that's what it means to have a Tisha B'Av. Every year that there's a Tisha B'Av means that the next Tisha B'Av will be worse. It means that you will be smaller. You will have been diminished. That's what it means. In the year when there is no Tisha B'Av, it means you will have expanded. The choice fundamentally is yours. You can either be the wall with the mosque sitting behind it, and the prayer of the Muslims heard all over Yerushalayim, or you can be what? You can be a Beit HaMikdash and have access to a window into heaven. More than that, you can be yourself a window into heaven by virtue of the powers which exist in your own mind and in your own consciousness. The choice fundamentally is yours, but that's what the choice is about, and nothing else. Yeah.
If a million people on the level of the Ari were unable to sustain society without Tanakh and Shekhinah had a leader, how does that expect to be done now?
The question is being essentially asked is that if these men were so great and they were so powerful, how do we get to our position now, really? How did they descend so that we are the result? The answer is, basically, is that whatever level you are at, no matter how powerful you are as a person, you are given an evil inclination of exactly the same stature. Man is a balanced being, which means that if in one sense you have a power to acquire spirituality, on the other sense you have a power to destroy it. And there's an equal balance. Just to mention this thing, for example, is that a long time ago, people used to worship idols. And just very briefly, as I've said a number of times, why did people worship idols? What it was, and what is a deep mystery, which we do not have anymore, is that the ancients didn't sit and worship idols. They knew that these objects are meaningless. We think that those people worshiped idols and they were stupid. And we're modern day man, and we've grown in intelligence. As I said before, that was not the case. But what happened was is that they knew how to draw down cosmic forces from the objects. What they knew what to do is that they understood the arrangement of spiritual forces, incredibly powerful cosmic forces. And they knew they had certain arts and they had certain understanding where they can tie this cosmic force to a specific physical object. And by certain types of rites or certain types of manipulation, they can draw down that power. That idol worship wasn't an idol, it wasn't a stone. We see it as a stone. Because we don't understand the power they had. To them it was a stone that in some way they knew how to access a spiritual force and bring it down. It was that spiritual force that they were after. But they knew that to bring it down they had to have a physical object. You see, when you go to Egypt and you go to a place, the Temple of Karnak, I don't know who's ever been there, it's an awesome place. It's an incredible place with columns and pylons, 50 feet high of solid stone built one on top of another. It is awesome. The entire temple is the size of a football field. In the middle of the temple at the back, there was one room. It was an empty room now, there's nothing in it. In that room took place the magical and the worship of Egypt at that time. Nobody knows what's going on in that room. That room is empty. All we see is a bunch of statues. And all we see is an empty room. But the ancient Egyptians and the ancient Babylonians knew. They knew how to draw down powerful cosmic and spiritual forces. Just to show you an example which I give, and I've said this before, when Moshe Rabbeinu came to the Egyptians and he turned the Nile into blood, which is not a bad feat, the Egyptians were not impressed. Moshe was taking his prayer from the Bnei Shalom, and the Egyptians were not impressed. Why not? Because they could do the same thing. How could the Egyptians turn the Nile water to blood? And I mean real blood. With all the red blood cells and all the white blood cells and so on and so forth. I don't know what blood type, but it was real blood. And they were able to do it. How were they able to do it? Because they knew the essential spiritual forces which were behind the molecular entities of water and behind the constituents of blood. They knew that. And they can alter physical reality by these cosmic forces. How? By the worship of these idols. There was a very great Talmudist, Rav Ashi, who wrote the Gemara. And Rav Ashi was once commenting on one of the kings of Israel, whose name was Menashe, who was a very evil king. And he once said jokingly to one of his colleagues, this Menashe was a fool. Why would he want to worship Avodah Zarah? Why would he want to do that? Why would he want to worship idols? What was he, a fool? So Menashe appeared to him in a dream and said, Rav Ashi, who was the greatest Talmudist of his time, and was an astounding tzaddik. He said, Rav Ashi, if you were in my time, you would have picked up your skirt, because at that time they wore togas, they wore skirts, and you would have run after the worship of idols. That's what he told Rav Ashi. Why? Because he said, you don't understand. You're a man who lived after the destruction of the temple. I lived before the destruction of the temple. You and I are not the same people. We're different species. You don't understand. I had knowledge and access to forces which you can't even conceive of. And just like I have knowledge of spiritual forces that are good and holy, of Kedusha, I had also knowledge of evil forces that can do enormous, enormous things. And what happened was, between these two forces, I had a drive in either direction. Just like I can do things spiritually, prophecy, and all kinds of miracles from a good side, from a side of holiness, I could do the same thing from an evil side. I had the same thing, except that it was up to me which way I wanted to go. But I had the power from both ends. And I had a drive to worship idols. Just like you have a drive to eat, I had a drive to worship idols. It was in me, because my soul was that great. My soul, my person, was directed to all the spiritual forces, with the good and evil. So I had to choose on that plane, on that level. You choose on a much smaller plane, because you're like a roach compared to me. You don't even know what these things were. You're like an insect compared to what I was. So don't you dare comment on what I did. That's the answer. Because even though these men were astounding in their ability, they also had astounding Yetzaros. Just like they had the desire and the access to spiritual forces of enormous power of Kedusha, they had desires and access to spiritual forces which are very dangerous and which could destroy their souls. And this is what they had. And there was an equal balance between these two forces. What the Baruch Shem did was that he diminished man, and he took away the ability to what? To access these spiritual forces. So what he did was he diminished the good drive and the evil drive, so that now it's only concentrated on whether or not I want to eat something kosher or something treif. But that really wasn't what it was about over there. Over there is whether or not you wanted to bring down the force, the cosmic force, that can turn what? Water into blood? Or you wanted to bring down the cosmic force of some other thing. It was a choice of a whole different set of choices. Modern man today, we no longer know this. So when we look at the ancients, we think they were a bunch of fools. They worshipped idols, and they did all these things. But the truth of the matter is, because all we have left, when we dig up the ground in archaeology, and we dig up the Egyptian tombs, and we see these funny-looking idols, and these huge statues, we see the dead body. It's like, for example, coming and looking at what? It's like looking at a dead person, a dead body. Looking at a corpse of somebody that you didn't know, and trying to understand who he was. It's like looking at the corpse of Albert Einstein, and trying to understand what this man was about. Can you understand what Einstein was as a person by looking at his corpse? That is exactly what archaeology is about. Archaeology is a study of what? It is a study of spiritual corpses. That's all it is. So we assume that that's what they did. We can't understand it. What were they doing? Fooling around with dead bodies. But what archaeologists don't know is that these bodies were once alive. What archaeologists don't know is that these statues once were connected to incredible powers. That's what's lost. That's why the study of archaeology is nothing more than the study of art. Archaeologists are nothing more than sophisticated ancient artists who study what it was like to do certain types of paintings, certain types of bas-relief, certain types of sculptures, and that's all they know. So they can tell you the paintings and the types of pigments that were used in different times, and the brushes, and some of the constructions of the temples and so on. That's all they know. They see the corpse. So they know that there's an arm and there's a leg and so on. But they do not know and understand what that corpse was when it was alive. They don't understand what that statue was all about when it was alive. They have no idea. Why do I say this? Because that was what man was alive. That's what he was like when the Beis HaMikdash was here. But the evil inclination of a man is equal to the good inclination. The Yetzer Hara is equal to the Yetzer Tov. And they were able to do sins just like we were able to do sins. Except that when they did sin, it was much more damaging. And when they did mitzvahs, it was much more beneficial. You see, they had, essentially, they were given tanks. We are given BB guns. That's essentially the difference. But, in either case, they had the same directions and the same conflict, except that the power that they had and the ability to do damage or do things well was much greater than ours. And that's our punishment. The Baruch Shem says, if you don't do it right, I'm not going to let a madman run around, what? With his finger next to the button? That's what the Baruch Shem says. What do you think? I'm going to let a crazy man work with all these nukes? So the Baruch Shem says, I'll diminish him. I'll make him small, like an insect. So he'll barely have any power to do anything. But that's a punishment. Because by becoming small, we have lost the incredible stature of what we once were. Adam Rishon, the first man. What was the power of Adam Rishon? The power of Adam Rishon was incredible. When Adam Rishon did a sin, what was the result of a sin? He brought death in the world, and he affected the entire physical universe. How can a man be so powerful that he affects the entire physical universe? It's awesome. But that's what Adam Rishon did. Because he had that power. We no longer have that power, so that we don't destroy the physical universe. You see? And basically that's where it is. Yes?
When somebody walks into the Beis HaMikdash, they could sense the Shekhinah, and they could appreciate it. And today, there are times when the Shekhinah is closer and further away, and at certain times, like most of Shabbos, there are certain places in Mourning Torah. So, some level, should a man be able to sense the Shekhinah?
You've answered your own question. Some level. listen to what you just did. Some level.
But you should be able
Kei Chachomim Ma'abrim Shalom Boyim. And what that says, the Gemara says that a Talmud Chacham who sits and learns Torah brings peace to the world. Now that's a very strange remark. What does that mean? That means that when you take a sefer and you sit and learn, you bring peace to the planet Earth. Now what does that mean? How is that possible? Well, are you going to Deng Xiaoping and what do you call it? And you're going to what? You're going to sit down and try and negotiate some kind of a new treaty or new kind of new settlement? Are you sitting down with Gorbachev? No. So how can you bring peace to the world? The answer is, and that is the power of a mitzvah. Every time you do a mitzvah, you bring the presence of God closer to the world. When that presence of God comes closer, it not only comes closer to you, but it comes closer to the entire planet. Which means that it is impossible for you to do a mitzvah or a transgression without affecting all of mankind. The Talmud says, an incredible statement, if the goy realized that everything which happens to the world, all the wars and all the tragedies and all the difficulties which happen to the world and all the good things happen only because of the Jews and their mitzvahs, they would assign 2 soldiers to every Jew and force them to do the Torah. The Gemara says that. If they understood that it is in the Jews' hands to control the nature of the world, all international politics, all domestic politics is controlled by the mitzvahs of that little lonely old Jew sitting in his house, in that room, hunched over a sefer. All of it comes from that, except that it's not visible. But when you flick a switch, you see the current that goes through the wire, through the bulb? No. But the Gemara says that the generator of all the events of the world, whether positive or negative, stem from the Jews. Except that the Goyim don't know it. It all stems. And that the state of the world is an exact reflection of the state of the Jews. And the state of the Beit HaMikdash is a reflection of the state of the Jews. It all is connected to your mitzvah. As we've said last week, and I'm not going to repeat it, if you had an inkling of how powerful you were, you'd literally be frightened about making a next step. If you realize the power which lies in a mitzvah or not, you do not know your power. You see, the problem is that even though you may look like an insect, your free will still makes you like godly in certain respects. Therefore you have the power to undermine or to reinforce, to invigorate all of reality in your mitzvah. And it's all up to you. And the way you're using that power is a reflection of what Tisha B'Av looks like. Tisha B'Av is a reflection of what the world looks like in every year and in every generation. Okay.